Here this week for the interview is Dr. Heather Lyon. Heather is a former English teacher and is now the Assistant Superintendent of Curriculum, Instruction, and Technology for the Lewiston Porter Central School District in Western New York. Heather is also the author of two books. The first is Engagement is Not a Unicorn, It's a Narwhal. And the other is The Big Book of Engagement Strategies. So listeners, you can imagine what we're going to talk about today as Heather joins me on the podcast. So Heather, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Yeah, it's great. I'm glad you're joining me today. Certainly, Happy New Year to you. And although I often say to non-educators that the Happy New Year in January is a little overrated for educators because Happy New Year professionally tends to happen in the fall. So I suppose it's Happy New Year personally in January, but Happy New Year professionally in the fall as it goes. Yeah, for sure. Engagement is a big topic right now. It's certainly something that I come across in conversations frequently, and I really do look forward to getting into the conversation about, engagement and some of the differences between engagement and compliance. But let's start with the professional autobiography. Some of the highlight. I've highlighted some things in the introduction. You're an author, you're an assistant superintendent, but fill in some of the spaces for us. Help us understand your professional journey and maybe some of the pivotal moments that shaped your thinking as an educator and led you to, authoring two books about student engagement.
How long do we have? No, I'm kidding.
It's a podcast, Heather. You can take as long as you need.
Right. I never really wanted to be a teacher. Growing up, I originally wanted to be a ballerina, then I wanted to be an actress, then I wanted to be a writer. And back in the day when I graduated from high school, I went to college to get a degree in English because I wanted to be a well-paid, famous author. But I knew that was not going to happen overnight. And so I thought, how do I not live with my parents for the rest of my life? And so teaching was my backup plan. Just like if I had wanted to be an actress, maybe would have become a waitress or something in the meantime to pay the bills. And a pivotal moment for me was when I was doing my student teaching, my first cooperating teacher in my first placement. Her name is Dee Schwartz, and she was just inspirational to me. She made me realize that I really enjoyed teaching very much. And as an English teacher, I could assign people to read the books that I wanted to talk about. And so it was fantastic. And they could write about the things that I wanted to read about. And so I really enjoyed that very much. But I thought very early in my career, like, I don't know if I could do this forever because I had to teach longer than I'd been on the planet at that point. And so if teaching was my new plan A, what was my new backup plan going to be? So administration was the backup plan. And I never really wanted to be a principal or certainly not an assistant principal, just because I wasn't working for people who were educational leaders. They were more managers of a building, and that didn't have any appeal to me. Right. But I don't know. Ultimately, I ended up with my administrative degree, and just what I realized is that I really do love teaching. And even though I do love teaching children, I love teaching adults even more than that. And so I have always enacted my job as an administrator, as a teacher of teachers.
It's about that influence, right? It's about the sphere of influence. I think and it's interesting to me how so many people are influenced by the principals or assistant principal that they had. If you had someone who was an instructional leader, someone who was inspiring, someone who really brought the best out of you, then administration might seem like something that you'd want to get into. And yet if you have someone who is I don't want to undersell the management stuff because it's important to be able to manage a school building as well, but that's not inspiring to others in terms of why they would get into administration. So it's interesting how our early experiences, we either try to right the wrong, I'm going to be different in administration, or you are inspired by somebody and you kind of want to replicate that. You want to be that for others, that someone was for you, and certainly about influence. And I agree with you. I think the teaching of adults and working with, as I do, working with schools and districts, and influencing has a far greater reach to students. We're a little bit more indirect, but certainly a reach to students. So let's pivot and talk now about engagement, which is clearly an area of focus for you. You've authored 2 books, and I am so intrigued by the title of the book. And admittedly, I haven't read the book yet. This interview kind of came together quickly, and certainly I love the fact that we had a chance to talk to one another. But I haven't read the book. But from what I understand about the title, I just am really intrigued by it. Engagement is not a unicorn; it's a narwhal. Okay, Heather, what do you mean by that?
Okay, so if I were to go up to a 2-year-old child and to ask them what a unicorn is, they could tell me. Even though a unicorn is actually not real. There's no place on earth where these horned horses exist. However, narwhals are real. Many people don't even know what a narwhal is. So for those folks who are listening who don't know what a narwhal is, it's a whale actually that has a horn growing out of its forehead, and you've probably seen one if you've watched the movie Elf, for example.
Right.
But even if you have seen one, because they've become more popular these days, you may not know what it's called, that it's called a narwhal, or that it's a real animal swimming around right now in our oceans. So what happened was I was writing the book, the big book of engagement strategies. I'm sorry. No, I was writing Engagement is Not a Unicorn, It's a Narwhal.
Mm-hmm.
And it didn't have that title yet. And the book is divided into 3 sections: what, so what, and now what. And in the book, I explain 4 levels of engagement. So the what is about the 4 levels. So what is about why those 4 levels are important. And now what are strategies to help you get someone from one level to another. And I got to the point of the highest level of engagement, which is absorption. So how to get students to be absorbed. And I hit a wall. And I thought to myself, I know absorption exists outside of school, but where does absorption exist in school? Mm-hmm. And so I really had to take a pause and do a lot of reflection. And ultimately I realized, silly, duh, it happens all the time, but it's not what we think it is. So we often think of engagement as a unicorn being this mythical thing. Rather, it is not mythical, it's real, but it's unusual, it's uncommon, and it's not as easy to spot as we may think. And so on page, it's not a unicorn, it's a narwhal, on page 166 in the book. And you can also find this on my website, because every image in both of my books are free on my website, www.lyons, Lyons, letters, letters.com. So anyway, I give a side-by-side comparison of engagement as a unicorn versus engagement as a narwhal. So some of these will make you laugh here.
Okay.
Okay, so like the first one says, engagement as a unicorn is students applaud and thank the teacher for the fantastic lesson. Like, if that's what we're aiming for, we're going to miss it every time. It doesn't happen.
Right.
But engagement as a narwhal is students feel proud of their own work and learning. That's what we should be going for. Right. Engagement as a unicorn. Parameters like standards, curriculum, and assessments are determined by the teacher. Well, teachers don't determine the standards. They may not have say over the curriculum that they're told that they have to use. They may have to give standardized tests and things like that. So that level of control is mythical. We shouldn't be looking at that. But engagement as a narwhal is the teacher and students leverage the dictated parameters. So even if the teacher has boundaries, the students have high levels of freedom. So that's what we're looking for. And that's really the difference. So the title means that engagement is not mythical, it really is possible.
Right. And we probably should have added a spoiler alert for any listeners who are listening to the podcast in the car or somewhere around their children. Unicorns are not real to adults, but for children, it's a little bit different. Heather, we have to be mindful of our listening audience here. All right. Now, I have had two really continuous experiences over the last few months with teachers, schools, and districts that I've worked with, and I'd love to hear your perspective on it. I'll tell you the first, and then I'll get your response, and then I'll go to the follow up. And the second experience that I've had, the first is that it seems as maybe as much as ever that many are conflating this idea of compliance and engagement. How do you explain the difference between the two? How do you talk about the difference between compliance? Because I think sometimes teachers feel like if students are being compliant and doing their work, they assume they're engaged. But you and I both know those are two different things. So how do you explain the difference between those two?
So let me take a step back and give you a formula. So
Okay.
here's the formula to determine what engagement is. So engagement equals enjoyment of the task, what you're asked to do, plus the reward for the task. That's really it boiled down.
Okay.
Enjoyment of the task plus the reward for doing the task. And so in in the books, I talk about the engagement continuum, which is that there are 4 levels of engagement. So from left to right, meaning the lowest level of engagement on the left to the highest level on the right, you have non-compliant,
Mhm.
compliant, interested, and absorbed. Non-compliant and compliant are both levels of disengagement
Okay.
because there is no enjoyment in a task that you are doing because you have to do it. And that's what compliance is. I don't want to do it, but I'm doing it anyway. So, interested means I want to do it and I like the reward I get for doing it.
Mhm.
Absorbed is I want to do this and the reward comes from inside of me.
Mhm.
And so that is the highest level. I do want to caution the listeners to say that absorption is a place we visit, not a place we live, to echo Charlotte Danielson. And
Mhm.
so, in other words, we shouldn't aim for absorption for every student in every classroom every day. Human beings are not wired to be absorbed in everything that they encounter. But we should at least aim for interest for every student in every classroom every day, which is kids are doing work that they want to do and they enjoy the reward that they get for doing that.
Mhm.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say you used a word that I know will catch listeners' attention, and that is the word reward.
Hmm.
Okay, can you clarify what you mean by reward? You're not. I know you're not suggesting sort of something tangible, but just clarify when you say that someone is interested and they appreciate or enjoy the reward. What do
Yeah.
you mean by that?
So take that continuum, which is a linear line, and
Yeah.
let's bend it pole to pole. So
Okay.
imagine that you're seeing a 2 by 2 matrix or window pane. Um, and so that continuum was insufficient to me because I wanted to know what would cause somebody to move or change their level of engagement. And so, what are the variables that are connected to that? So, that leads to the engagement matrix. So, along the bottom or the horizontal axis is the task. So, on the left side, you don't enjoy doing the task, and on the right side, you do enjoy doing the task.
Hmm.
So, bottom left is non-compliance, top left is compliance, top right is interested, bottom right is absorbed. So those are the sections in the matrix.
Okay.
Now, the vertical axis is your relationship with the person assigning the task or the consequence, positive or negative, that you get for doing the task. So that's the
Mhm.
reward.
Okay.
So a non compliant person, bottom left, does not want to do the task, they don't like it, and they don't care about the relationship they have with the person assigning it. and they don't care about the carrot or stick that they get for doing the task. In other words, I don't care about this, I don't care about you, and I don't care about what happens to me if I do or don't do this,
Right.
right?
Okay.
So, in order to shift from non-compliance to compliance, you are not making a move to the right. In other words, you're not enjoying the task anymore. You are shifting your relationship with either the person assigning the task or the consequence, positive or negative, that you get for doing the task. So, bottom left, non-compliant, I don't like this task. Top left, I still don't like this task. Bottom left, I'm not doing this for free.
Hmm.
Top left, if you pay me $50, I'll do it. Doesn't mean I
Ah,
want to do it, but
right.
now you've incentivized it in such a way positively that now I'll do it. Now it could be a stick, right? So
Yeah.
that was the carrot. The stick would be, um, I wouldn't do this for free, but you're going to fine me. And so now you're going to make me pay if I don't do this.
Right.
I'll do it.
Got it.
Or it's, I wouldn't do this for anybody else, but grandma, you asked me to do it. I love you, grandma. I will do it for
Hmm.
you, grandma.
Okay. Okay.
So that's non-compliance to compliance. Your question though was about compliant to engaged, and I'm
Right.
going to say compliant to interested because
Okay.
that's the next threshold, although it doesn't have to be a linear move. But what you've done now is you've shifted the task. I now want to do the task. And of course, you might have some folks who are rolling their eyes, who are like, well, of course, changing the task might get somebody to be more engaged in it, but there are tasks that I can't change. And I'm like, yeah, that's true. There are. But actually, so much of the time, we have control over what we ask our students to do.
Hmm.
And we don't allow students to have choice and voice about what it is that they're doing. And choice and voice is the easiest way to go from compliant to interested. And I'm not talking about like complicated differentiation where you have to create something different for every single child in the classroom. I am saying that the worksheet that you're passing out to the kids to do, like, why? Why do they have to do that worksheet?
Right.
That's a choice you've made as the adult for the kids. Now, let's say they have to do that worksheet. I don't know why, but let's say they have to. Well, could you say, and there are 10 problems on there. Could you say to the kids, how you don't have to do all 10 problems? What's reasonable? And get them involved in, well, what about only doing 5 of them? All right. Well, if you and you could have a number in your head. It wouldn't be less than 5. So if they say none, you're like, all right, well, I guess I'm going to have to choose for you. No, 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 let me choose type of thing. You could turn that into something that is much more enjoyable. You can also say to kids something like, do the 5 easiest.
Hmm.
I mean, telling a kid to do the 5 easiest. Now, you might have some kid who's going to do just the first 5. Well, that's fine. But the metacognitive effort that it takes to actually select which are the 5 easiest, that's really interesting, isn't it? And you could even ask the kids, explain why you chose those 5. There's a lot of engagement that can be achieved from that um, without a lot of effort.
Yeah.
But I want to say, in terms of because interested is top right, that means there's some type of dynamic of an extrinsic that's going on there, either the relationship or the consequence. And I think teachers have a really hard time with that when I talk about it with kids. So I'm going to shift to now talking about it with adults.
Okay.
Okay. So let me just quickly slide to absorbed though, because absorbed tasks are the tasks we do for ourselves. There is no extrinsic that is necessary. I'm not doing it for somebody else, and I'm not doing it for a positive or negative consequence. I'm doing it because I want to do it. Well, those things in our adult life are things that we pay to do, actually. They're the things we do on the weekend or during our free time.
Right.
Tom, I love to cook, but nobody has ever paid me to cook for them. And so they shouldn't. Like, my love of it doesn't mean that I'm necessarily skilled enough that somebody should compensate me for doing that. And in fact, if I try to receive compensation for doing it, it may deflate my desire to do it because now doing it has a monetary consequence. So, for example, my husband loves to play basketball and, pays for a membership to the Y so he can play basketball. And, asked me, can our kids not be born on a night when he's playing basketball? Like, he loves it.
Yeah.
But he loves it more than Steph Curry loves to play basketball because Steph Curry has to pay his mortgage to pay back to play by playing basketball. My husband just gets to do it because.
Yeah.
And he's not as good as Steph Curry because he doesn't have the time to devote to getting good.
Mhm.
Although, if he's listening, you're very good at playing basketball, Howard.
Nice save, Heather.
Yes. But so let's take that and let's
Yeah.
go to interested. So, interested are the things we enjoy doing enough and are good enough at doing that we get paid to do it.
Mhm.
And so I don't want to get paid for cooking because I love to cook, but I don't want the pressure of getting paid because I'm doing it.
Mhm.
I am a school administrator and I really love my work, but on Friday nights, I am ready to set that work to the side and do other things. And
Yeah.
that's perfectly okay. And so you're interested if you enjoy doing that thing, but you need the consequence externally in order to do it. I'm going to stop doing my administrative work if they stop paying me.
Mhm. Right, right.
Um, and on the weekends, I don't want to continue to do it. For our students, it's really okay if during your class they really enjoy doing that work, but when the bell rings, they get up and go.
Mhm.
That's really okay. And you know that they're interested if you're when you ask them about the work that they're doing, they're eager to tell you about it. But they're absorbed when you don't have to ask, they come to you and they tell you about it. And
Mhm.
there's the difference. And so, kids who are interested, students who are interested, that's a really nice place for them to be. But when the bell rings, how do they respond?
Right, right. We can always find something. I think sometimes we assume because some aspect of the learning is required that none of it is negotiable and none of it is pliable. And I think if you look closely enough, you'll be able to find if there's a certain, skill that's required, then the content used to develop that skill can be negotiable and students have the opportunity to make choices. I think there's opportunities if we look closely enough. Heather, you and I share a passion for cooking. I had a segment on the podcast a few weeks ago called, or last month actually, called "If Not Ed, If Not Education, What Career Would You Choose?"
Hmm.
And mine was chef.
Oh,
So
really?
that yeah, so I talked about that, and a number of different listeners tweeted about the different careers they would have chosen if not education. It wasn't meant to say had I gone in a different path and kind of dump on education. It was more of a fun segment just to say if not eds, but for me it was a chef. So we share that, and just to be clear, as you say. Just because I love it doesn't necessarily mean I'm good at it, and no one should pay me to cook for them. That's for sure. But I'm getting better. I'm getting better, and I like to try things that are complicated, and I like to try to learn those techniques. Okay,
Wait,
follow up
wait, wait.
question.
No,
Oh,
wait.
okay. No, no. All right, go ahead.
Okay. And this is one of the things that, because you just said, I like to try complicated things. I
Yeah,
may not be good at it, but I like to do that.
yeah.
In schools, we don't create complexity, we create simplicity because we grade kids. And because we grade using averages mostly,
Hmm.
the average requires that you are excelling at every attempt. But in reality, the things that we have the highest levels of engagement in are things that we routinely fail at and learn through that failure. But because there is no grade attached to it,
Mhm.
we're not demotivated by that failure. In fact, we're motivated by it.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so if somebody were to grade you on the thing that you attempted to cook but got wrong, you would probably be disinclined to try it in the first place or go back to it or, give yourself that high bar of complexity.
Yeah, it would. I suppose it would depend also on whether or not I was given a, if we want to get into the assessment, sort of the reassessment opportunity and then the
Yeah.
dismissing of old evidence. And there's
Yes.
lots we can do with assessment and grading as listeners. I've talked about this on the podcast every week, but there are lots of things we can do to reshape that grading culture to make it more conducive to learning and to ensure that students don't lose that motivation for sure. So here is that follow-up question about those experiences I've been having recently. The first was this conflating of compliance and engagement. The second experience I have, no matter where I go, and this has been happening since I got back to traveling in July, throughout the entire fall and now into the winter, no matter where I go, it seems that the message from teachers is very similar place to place. And that is that now that we are sort of back to school full time, face to face, and of course, it depends on where you live, on what your face to face experience would be. But now that we are back face to face full time, students seem to be less engaged than ever before as a result of the pandemic. So, what advice do you have for teachers who are, this is not coming from a cynical place. They are legitimately struggling to rekindle student engagement while the pandemic is still happening? Well, what's the advice to teachers?
So I want to just capitalize on this moment of talking about the difference between behavioral engagement and learning engagement. So we often give kids a pass on learning engagement if they're at least compliant with our behavioral expectations. So it's okay to not do the thinking as long as you're quietly not disturbing other people. It's okay for students to look like they're doing school, even if they're not actually having their minds on the learning. And so a lot of what I am hearing and seeing taking place in schools is behaviorally driven, as well as the learning conversation. And so students' behaviors are really different after this whole virtual hybrid type of experience that happened in the first 18 months of the pandemic. And I think students' school behaviors, because they were out of school for so long, look different now. And teachers are really focused on the behaviors
Mhm.
and saying these kids aren't, I don't know, school ready, school appropriate, school whatever, right? And first of all, I think some of this is trauma. And so I want to make sure that when we're talking about kids and their potential manifestations of what their trauma is looking like for them, um, that we're talking about that in a way that honors that these kids aren't being defiant. They're not being overtly trying to be rude or disrespectful. They are living through something that is completely out of their control, that has impacted them in ways that we don't even know yet. And so a lot of this is trauma based. And then the other is that um, a lot of students were home alone, especially middle school and up. They were home alone. And so they were these pseudo adults who were making choices without supervision in terms of how to create a learning environment for themselves because their parents went back to work. And so they're accustomed to being in a position where they had a lot more control, and they're coming to school where they're being treated like they were not responsible before for themselves in some way. And so they want this autonomy and authority. And so
Mhm.
I would say, what are ways that you can, tap into a human desire to have a certain sense of ownership? And that definitely leads to greater levels of engagement. A kid sitting in a desk or being quiet throughout a lesson, if kids are challenged to do that, then give them activities where there's movement and um, there's opportunities for them to speak. I know that sounds obvious, but sometimes we go back to the way that we've always done things, and
Mhm.
then wonder why it isn't working because it used to work, but the variables have changed. So we need to be adaptive to the variables that are in front of us.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think we tend to go back to what's familiar to us. It gives us comfort. This last couple of years has been certainly incredibly disruptive, to say the least, to everyone in society, including schools. And I think for adults, going back to routine and going back to familiarity is important. But the rules have changed, and students have been affected. And I think your point about trauma is well taken, because I think we have to recognize that whatever impact adults have felt through the pandemic, it's magnified for students who don't think like adults, don't have adult brains, they don't rationalize like adults, they don't have as much control that adults have. And so I think being sensitive to that certainly helps us. So let's finish up today with some go-to strategies that you have. You, of course, wrote the book called The Big Book of Engagement Strategy. So clearly you have a lot of strategies at your fingertips there, for sure. So
Yeah.
let's talk about getting started. Let's say I'm a teacher.
Mhm.
I've never really thought too much about, I can't imagine this, but this is hypothetical. I've never really thought too much about engagement for whatever reason.
Mhm.
And I want to get started. I'm listening to you, Heather, and I'm saying, you know what? I probably do need to be more mindful of how I pay attention to engagement. So how would you advise me if I was in that
So
position?
I'm going to give three quick strategies here. One to go from non-compliant to compliant, one to go
Okay.
from compliant to interested, and one from interested to absorbed. And
Perfect.
so the very first strategy that I'm going to share is the very first strategy in Engagement is Not a Unicorn, It's a Narwhal. And it's the strategy of using equity sticks. And so it's given the students a number. If I'm a secondary student or teacher, I'm going to give kids numbers. So it's not that I'm not going to learn their names, but I'm going to have a jar of popsicle sticks numbered one through whatever, however many kids are in that class. And I'm going to pull the stick instead of call on kids raising their hands. If I'm an elementary teacher, I'm going to have the kids' names on there because I'm working with the same kids all day.
Right.
The reason why this works is because I do not want kids to raise their hands in my classroom, because what I've done is I've made learning voluntary. I want it to be something where everybody's on the hook. And so this strategy works by you actually ask the question first so that you ensure all students are thinking about what the answer could be. And then you pull the stick after. You also then put the stick back in so every child has once if you take the stick out, that means I now no longer have to participate anymore because my stick is out.
Right.
Um, so that's the first one that I'll share.
Okay, let me
And
stop you there.
yeah,
So just
mhm,
quick follow up to that.
yes.
So if I'm a student, you pull my number and I legitimately don't know the answer to the question.
Mhm.
What happens?
So I say, all right, t- there are a couple of ways to handle that. One would be pretend you do know an answer. Give me what's the, you know,
Yeah.
you don't let them off the hook. You probe their thinking. That's really important for me as a teacher to know, what my kids' logic is. The other is, okay, I'm going to put you back in. I'm going to pull a stick for somebody else. And so you're back in and you're still on the hook. Or I could say, you know, this next kid is going to answer, but you're going to repeat the answer so that way to lock it in.
Right.
So there are several different ways to approach that.
Yeah, to
But great
paraphrase that
question.
response. I love that. Okay. All right,
Mhm.
let's go to the next one. What's the
Okay.
next one?
So the next one is also from Engagement is Not a Unicorn, It's a Narwhal. And this is the first one from getting to compliant to interested. And this is, I call it earning your pay in the book, but it's really a choice board. And
Okay.
so it's giving kids options as to assignments to do the learning. So any of these would work, but as the student, I'm giving you the ability to navigate which of these choices you're going to do to demonstrate your learning. So I call this earn your pay because I've awarded point values to these in the book. And so you need to get a certain total in order to demonstrate your level of proficiency. I do want to say, uh, just quickly, the difference between choice and voice. So voice is, okay, Tom, it's your birthday. We can go to any restaurant you want to go to. Where would you like to go? And Tom, your voice determines where we go. Once we get to that restaurant, the restaurant has a menu of options. That menu of options are the choices.
Mhm.
So when I do something like Earn Your Pay, which is a choice board, I always include on there, or almost always include on there, a voice option. In other words, here are all the choices, this menu of items that I thought of, but the last menu choice is the voice option. Tell me something, propose something to me that
Mhm.
you think would demonstrate your learning that might be different than the choices that I've given you.
Great. Yeah, I think that's a very important. Give them the parameters, give them the menu, but there's always an option to just like in a restaurant, you may have an allergy, you may have something there where you have to let the server know that in your order there needs to be some sort of special adjustment. Okay, third strategy.
Okay, the third strategy, and this one comes from the big book of engagement strategies. It's the last strategy in the book. One of the things that I loved about writing this book is that I collaborated with many contributors, and so there are definitely strategies in here that I've written and used, but there are also um, 15 educators who contributed to it with over 20 different strategies from them.
Wow.
And the last strategy in here is called Room to Breathe, or R2B. And it's from a pair of teachers in Alberta, so your neighbors. Um, and in Room to Breathe, the students are, so they call it inhaling and exhaling, these teachers. And so an inhale is when students are reading or listening to something, and exhaling is when they are producing something.
Hmm.
So they're writing it or speaking it. And so it's a really beautiful strategy to help students write and read, listen and speak for a purpose that is intrinsically motivated by the students. So you like to watch The Office? All right. So what is it that other people might want to know about The Office, and how can you do this in a scholarly way? And it's, I am, there are a lot of layers to it. Uh, so I can't describe it in full detail
Mhm.
as I'm sitting here, but the the point here is that it's project-based learning, but it's done so in a way that is authentic to the students and to the standards, which I really like.
Yeah, wonderful. There's obviously it's a big book of strategies. It's the engagement is not a unicorn; it's a narwhal. Tons of strategies in there, listeners, and certainly would encourage you to get one or both of those. So, Heather, we have two questions left as we finish up every interview on the podcast, and there are two questions that I ask everyone who comes on. And the first one is one that you can take in any direction you wish. But the question is, educationally speaking, what keeps you up at night?
I have to say the teacher shortage keeps me up at night. Um, I am I am on a committee that is called the Pipeline Committee. It's regional, and I keep saying to them, and we keep saying to each other, it's a regional committee. Like, this is not a regional problem. This is not a problem of we don't have enough teachers in Western New York, although we don't. And if you are looking for a job, please come to Western New York. We would love to hire you. Um, but this is not a New York problem. This is not an East Coast problem. This is a nationwide problem. And I turn on the TV and I see commercials for like become a nurse. People know about the nursing shortage. I see
Mhm.
commercials about, join the military or something like that. But where are the commercials that say become a teacher?
Yeah.
And it's a beautiful profession. And I definitely understand that we have both what I call a faucet issue and a drain issue. So picture a bathtub trying to fill up with water. So we don't have enough water coming in from the faucet, and that's the pipeline. But we also, our drain is too big, and we're losing more teachers than we can in order to provide quality education to kids. And it literally keeps me up at night.
Yeah.
And a lot of what I see posted about the teacher shortage is a lot of the why. And it has to do with being a teacher these days is a real challenge. It's you're underpaid, you're underappreciated, you're working round the clock, and lots of challenges. And there's legitimacy to all of them. I am hoping to hear more solutions. Like, yeah, those are problems. What can we do about it?
Right. I think you're spot on when you talk about it's not a regional issue; it's an everywhere issue for sure. And there was that little glimmer. If there was a silver lining to the pandemic, it was that little glimmer in the spring and maybe the fall of 2020, where there was an appreciation for the rigors of the job and an appreciation from society. And not that we are martyrs or anything like that, but certainly educators, we still have a long way to go in society to appreciate the full breadth and depth of what it means to be a teacher, for sure. Last question as we finish up, Heather, is about just a broad question about success. It's again a question I ask everyone, and it's pretty simple. If a random person stopped you on the street and asked you, Heather, what is your definition of success? How would you answer them?
I'd say, why are you coming up to me, random person on the street? It's such a strange
That's not
encounter.
part of the
No,
question,
I'm
Heather.
teasing.
All right.
No, I would say,
Who are you? Why are you
I know,
approaching me?
right?
I get it. Yeah, yeah. All right.
For me, success is about being in a place where you have the ability to make choices that lead to making your life better and happier, however you define that. I think there's some level of having some resources to do that.
Mhm.
But I am fortunate enough to be at a place in my life where, like, I have the ability to make choices about where I want to work, what car I want to drive, where I want to live, how many children I want to have. And I really am grateful to have resources to be able to do that. But more importantly, I think success is about deriving happiness and satisfaction from those choices that I'm making. Like,
Mhm.
I live a really charmed life. That doesn't mean like I have a vacation home and a yacht. Um, but I have people who I love and love me back, and we don't have to worry about whether or not the heat's going to work or,
Right.
the
Right.
food um, that we'll have. And you can be successful and happy and hungry at the same time.
Mhm.
But I think um, there's some level of cognitive load that is lightened when you have resources that are able to um, free you from thinking about, will I be able to eat, to what will I eat.
Right. 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 Resources and choices certainly, I suppose, give us that feeling that we have been successful in so many ways, for sure, and the recognition that not everyone necessarily has those choices and those options, but certainly that makes us feel as if we have been successful. Listeners, you definitely should follow Heather on Twitter and Instagram. The handle is the same. The handle is at Lyons Letters. So there's an S in there, even though Heather's last name is Lyon. It's LYONSLETTERS. You can also follow Heather on LinkedIn. And also, Heather mentioned this earlier, the website, www.lionsletters.com. There's lots of great information on that website, including how to connect with Heather more should you be in search of further support with student engagement and want to talk more with Heather about some opportunities maybe to work with you or to work with your school or school district. Heather, this was a great conversation, certainly a topic that is timely and relevant. Engagement is always something that teachers have been wrestling with and trying to figure out. And you clearly have articulated some great strategies for us. So many great ideas. Heather, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you.